Welcome, welcome, everybody. My guest today is David Arnoux, the co-founder and head of growth at GrowthTribe. GrowthTribe is Europe's first academy focused on growth marketing. And Arnoux is a marketing expert and serial entrepreneur. He has helped more than 500 companies to implement growth strategies. He founded 4 companies in the past 10 years. He spoke at CXL, The Next Web, and many other big marketing conferences. Welcome, David.
Hey,
It's an honor
great to be here.
to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you. Man, I mean, I've been an avid reader of GrowthTribe's content for years and know many satisfied students of your academy.
Oh,
So
nice.
first of all, congrats and thank you for taking the initiative on educating today's marketers. I think it's gravely needed. And so you can imagine I was super excited when I read on one of your LinkedIn posts a month or so ago when you announced you're getting into leadership courses as well, since a lot of listeners on this podcast are very interested in leadership. And so let's maybe start our conversation there. What's the reason you are starting this course in particular? So what kind of shifts have you seen, and why do you see a need for that in the marketplace?
Yeah, really good, great way to start. So as you said, what's funny with when you run a company is a lot of the way you see the world at the moment tends to be reflected in products that you release, let's say, based on user feedback, based on sort of strategies you have, but also based on the lens through which you see the world at the moment. So we started this company, GrowthTribe, like 5 years ago, and originally we started the world's first growth hacking. I know a lot of people hate that term. I've also learned to, not love it, but it was really the right term because it was sort of an aggressive term and it was unconventional and it got the discussion started. And we like to do that. So we started the world's first growth hacking academy. It was like 5 years ago, really focusing on execution teams, trying to build in like teams of 3 people, multidisciplinary teams to come into a company that doesn't really have this sort of tech plus marketing driven company and try to grow key metrics like retention metrics, engagement metrics, stickiness, whatever the most important metric at that time was. We've actually changed over the past 5 years. We've really matured, and now what we do is we're dedicated to keeping organizations competitive through learning digital capabilities, and we've gone for even simpler digital capabilities that we see are lacking within organizations. What we've seen is that building capabilities in-house, inside organizations, building capabilities into the DNA of the company has a greater long-term return on investment, like even bottom line ROI, than simply hiring people. So I'm talking like building capabilities in-house, than always buying those capabilities, hiring, or using consulting firms. And that's the reason why we started an education company 5 years ago. I used to consult and got paid a lot of money to come in, set up experimentation, set up data analytics, do user research, run experiments, do optimizations, do conversion rate optimizations, help launch campaigns, pre-test campaigns. But when I would do it as a consultant, 6 months later, after the project was sort of finished, let's say, I'd call back and like, are you guys still experimenting? No, not really. Like we were doing it when you were here. And I did 2 or 3 projects where I actually upskilled the people in the team rather than doing it myself. And there when I would call, and by the way, this was one for one of the world's largest consumer electronics companies on one hand, and on the other hand, it was like a pre-product market fit startup. Same result in both cases. Yeah, we're still doing it. It's amazing. That intern that you trained has become our head of growth. And by the way, what you were doing wasn't that complicated, and we're doing it better. You learned to do it. And there was like this organic, sustainable growth that had started to build within the company. We were embedding those, I like to say we're embedding those capabilities within the DNA of the organization. And for very long, we've been focused on sort of, let's look at the traditional org chart. I'm not talking like teal organizations or adaptive organizations or holacracy. If you look like a typical org chart, which by the way are the same since 1905, everything's changed except management. But you see that actually the main problems are not within the messy middle of the company. And not so much, it's usually within like C-suite or within the top executives of the organization who kind of still don't get it. And I'm especially for a little bit, maybe older, more traditional organizations, less for the tech natives. And so what we did for a long time, for the past 4 or 5 years, is we've transitioned away from just growth. So we still build growth and innovation capabilities within companies. So we're talking like experiment design, digital marketing, UX design, growth marketing, learning how to A/B test digital channels, digital intuition, all of that stuff. And then we started teaching things like customer experience. So behavioral psychology, service design, product management, or data and analytics. So we have a whole academy around data visualization, data storytelling, data analytics, all the way through to machine learning. And we started to realize actually it's actually the higher echelons of the organization that don't get it, that don't really have the growth mindset in some cases, that don't really get customer experience fully, that don't really understand this data-driven way of working, thinking in bets, and don't totally grasp data and analytics. What drives me nuts nowadays is you can be on the board of a Fortune 1000 company. You couldn't be on that board if you didn't understand profit and loss account, balance sheets, and cash flow. It would be impossible. But you're able to be on that board if you don't understand, for example, data, don't have an intuitive understanding of data. Like go to see a leader of Fortune 1000 company and ask them, what's the difference between let's take a machine learning example. What's the difference between supervised and unsupervised machine learning models? Or what's the difference between like a decision tree and a neural net, for example? And even though they can't build those models, they should have an intuitive understanding of what that actually means, but they don't. And, it's like 2020 now. So what we've seen is we need to build those capabilities in higher echelons of organizations. And when it comes to growth leaders, it's actually the opposite that's leading. It's like the rest of the org. So if you were to look at like a T-shaped leader, people who started in growth and grew organically, they understand data-driven, they understand data analytics, they understand user research, they understand experimentation, how to build an experimentation backlog, how to run an experimentation process. Where they're sometimes lacking is more on like foundational business skills, like stakeholder management. Running experimentation or running growth experiments in a company, even running data projects, it's almost like attacking the immune system of the organization. I call it like operating system override. You're overriding the current operating system of a company. And there you got to learn stakeholder management, big time, which goes through, visual communication, data storytelling, project planning, project mapping, and also understanding like finance. I mean, if I was a like entry-level growth leader nowadays, I'd take some finance courses as soon as possible, to understand what actually has an impact on what's important to the organization at the moment. But yeah, so that's the reason why we launched this sort of leadership course. We didn't launch it; we're just still testing it. But at the moment, we mostly focus on making leadership of larger organizations, 1,000 people plus. I'm going to use some buzzwords that have been overused, but more digitally savvy, more technologically savvy, more data savvy, so that they can, be missionaries and spread the word on this way of working and stop being blockers for actual execution teams. Like we're currently working with one of the largest insurance companies in the world, and there we came in and say we want to, teach your teams core capabilities for being customer centric. So data analytics, customer experience innovation, and then digital channels, and then there's a fourth one that I'm forgetting. But actually, when we run a capability scan within their company, we realized that first we needed to teach the growth mindset. Just that, the growth mindset, the fact that I as a person and us as an organization are simply a work in progress, will always be a work in progress.
And able to change, right?
100%. And coming from the scale-up world, where we used to train a lot of scale-ups, in startups, we didn't even know that was a prerequisite for what we needed to teach. So we're like, whoa, let's slow down on. We'll do data analytics, growth and innovation, customer experience innovation, and mindset next. Those three first. Next, let's first focus on the growth mindset. And what's great is that there's actually a real hunger to adopt the growth mindset and this more humble, data-informed way of working, this more agile way of working. There's a great appetite for it. There is. But no one's really figured out how to build that mindset within the organization. And that's what we're working on, and that's what we've now sort of figured out, I would say, as an organization.
That's really cool. Thank you. I think you touched on some really important topics here that a lot of growth leaders are actually grappling with. I think one of the main things is this change management inside the organization. How have you seen this in the company that you worked with? How often do you see that this bottom-up approach actually works so that someone within the organization can make this change happen versus where you are trying to attack now, if you want, the problem from the top down? Can you talk a bit about that?
100%. So for the last 2.5 years, we did bottom up. We really just a little bit like, let's take an analogy with Slack, let's say. We grew organically within an organization, like business leaders, like team managers. So let's take it back one step. What we would do is we would come into a data team or a product team or a marketing team and would be like, hey, you know what? Here's an experiment you can run. Take part of your consulting budget or your tooling budget. Let's invest it in capabilities. You'll see that if you allow us to take a team by the hand and show us this data-driven way of working for data teams, or a product team or a growth team, invest in capabilities rather than new tooling or rather than a big campaign or rather than consulting fees, that team will have the biggest ROI you've ever seen. And that worked. So then there was this showcase within the company. And typically we wanted to start working in waves. Once it starts working with one team, then we do 2 teams, then we do 4 teams, then we do 8 teams. What we see is that once you start hitting like 4 teams, then you go into this change management aspect where it's worked really well for these 4 teams. Now, how do we transform the entire organization? And there you need to start changing the organizational design of the company. For example, the way budgeting is done, the way departments are set up. So the actual org design. What we've done now is we believe in the sandwich approach, and it kind of makes sense in hindsight, but I think we didn't have the capabilities for the top-down approach before. And now as we've become sort of thought leaders, etc., we're also sitting down with boards or C-suites. So we try to have this sandwich approach. So what happens is we grow a little bit organically within the company, and then we get a table for the C-suite or the boards to be like, you know, some of the teams within your organization are working in this way. They've become more customer-centric. They've become more data-informed. The ROI is great. It's actually impacting the bottom line. And by the way, they're a lot happier to work in this manner than any other manner ever before. What about rolling out a company-wide program? But those take time, right? We're talking a year and a half to actually roll these out. But what we've seen is the board actually typically needs to get that growth mindset first. And it's actually pretty easy to implement. It's a lot of demystification sessions, a lot of inspirational sessions where we take beautiful stories from the startup world, from the corporate world, from the world of competitive food eating, and we get their neurons to start thinking in this manner. And then typically either we get buy-in and then we start thinking about rolling out programs, or we don't get buy-in and there's a resistance. In that case, to be totally honest, we're like, this is no place for us. If there's no, it's like going to the doctor, right? You get some diagnostics and then you do a few tests and scans. The doctor gives you the prognosis or the diagnosis. And it's like, either you want to take the medicine or not. And if you don't, like, we're like, okay, which doesn't happen often, but sometimes there is so much permafrost within C-suite. I call it permafrost, like so much resistance to change. And sometimes because people get a bit tired, like, oh, I have to reinvent myself again. Right. Like, I've been doing this for 30 years. Really? I've earned this. I've earned this position and I have this wisdom. Yeah, you have this wisdom from a financial point of view or from the market point of view, but you still don't get data or digital. You're not really digitally intuitive. And when the permafrost comes in, like, sorry, like we're only 110 people company. We're not going to fix this one. Let's maybe, but it's rare. I would say it's 1 out of 10 cases, to be totally fair, where the politics are just destroying that company from the inside. Most of the time, it's not the case.
I also think, though, that's an important lesson that comes up over and over in the podcast as well. Like, yes, you can go out and try to change things, but after a certain time, you just also need to have the courage to walk away, because if there's too much resistance, it's really hard I mean, you're kind of grinding yourself, right, into the ground if you keep trying to change. Now, do you have some kind of meta skills that you've seen the most successful growth leaders to have? So, I mean, you mentioned finance and business skills that are often lacking. Are there others that come to mind?
So there's that Ray Dalio mental model about how you view the world, which lens you view the world through. And I think the bigger your lens, the better leader you will be, and also growth leader. So if I remember the mental model exactly, is basically you could see the world through a certain aperture, and your position in this world through a certain aperture. The minimum aperture is you see it through yourself, then you see it through the lens of the team, then you see it through the lens of the company. That's what I call the minimal viable aperture. Then you can see it through the lens of country, see it through the lens of the industry, see it through the lens of the world, and see it through the lens of history. And that's probably the best aperture, right? You go back in time, even billions of years, because you can see also there's some parallels between being a growth leader and the law of evolution, right? Like some organisms make it, some don't, and it's a lot of randomized control tests that happen randomly. But to bring it back, the minimal viable aperture is definitely the company aperture. How can you understand your company if you don't understand finance? Very difficult. I mean, a lot of companies are run based on balance sheets, profit and loss accounts, and cash flow statements. If you want to know, like, we're always talking about getting those low-hanging fruits for growth experiments. How can you know which means like high impact and easy to run? Low-hanging fruit. How can you know what has a high impact if you don't understand basics of finance? If you don't understand what the P&L of your department is, or your business unit, or your actual company. So finance is very, very important one. Same thing with product. Like, you need to be living the product roadmap and understanding what's happening with product, with your data, with with the infrastructure that you're running with, but what features are being released, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with sales. I mean, really need to have a deep, deep understanding of what the key objectives and the core components are of the sales team. So basically, it's understanding what's happening with the other departments and the rest of the company strategy. Now, this is super simple. If you're like 25-person team or a company or less, you'll be aware of it all the time. Once you start hitting like 30 people plus, 50, 60 people plus, 100 people plus, it becomes more difficult. You really need to be interested in, I would recommend to go get that information and to study the brand guidelines, to study the OKRs in detail so that you get an intuition for what's happening within the company. So that's one, it's really being curious about what's going on within the org, within those other departments. So we're talking finance, hiring, product management, legal, design, user experience, et cetera, et cetera. Then in terms of meta skills, like the one that I think served me, and by the way, like I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Like, I know it sounds like all of this stuff is planned out and I have no clue. Nobody knows what they're doing. Let's be super honest.
I think that's an important insight. Everybody's winging it all the time.
All the freaking time. But even in terms of career, I've never, like, my first company was an import-export company out of China. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about import-export. Like, what was I doing? My second company was a fashion brand. I knew nothing about fashion, but always sort of following the early signals of what seems to be working. There are some visionaries out there. I mean, you've definitely got like Coco Chanel. She was an absolute freaking visionary. Carlotta Perez, who wrote Technological Revolutions and Financial Institutions. I think that's the name. She's an absolute visionary. Your Steve Jobs is a visionary. Elon Musk is a visionary. I think there's like 0.1% of leaders are visionaries. The others should just listen to the data or they get a little bit lucky.
No, I think it's an important point you make. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't want to come across as though I have the answers. I don't have the answers. I really don't. Like, we're just winging it all the time. But there's some philosophies that help you to wing it, or some mental models. My favorite mental model is seeing the world as a complex adaptive system. And it makes you really humble. Complex means that there's thousands of variables externally to your company and internally. Same thing for yourself. You're evolving in a complex adaptive system, which is your company, and your company is evolving in a complex adaptive system, which is the world, and the world is evolving in a complex adaptive system, which is like the cosmos. But that's okay because there the speed's a bit slower. But if you see your company as evolving within this so complex, millions of variables internally and externally, adaptive, always changing, always moving, and then system means everything's intertwined, then you become really humble. And you need to create yourself, your team, and your company as an adaptive organism that can adapt to change. Not perfectly. I mean, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're in a capitalist society. It needs to be a little bit better than the competition for yourself, for your team, or for your organization. And so that's one mental model or one meta skills that really sort of helps, a lens through which to see the complication of the world. Because once you do that, you start to take an approach to growth or to a company as a whole of thinking in bets, essentially thinking in sort of bets. We're basically at a poker table of some sorts, except it's much more complex than a poker table because the rules are always changing. And there you can start developing these meta skills around ways to see the world, a bunch of mental models. And I think one of the things that really has helped me manage complexity, because a growth role is one of the most complex roles out there, because it's cross-functional and you're dealing with every department. And it's like horizontally across the organization and vertically on the customer experience, on the customer journey. So everything. And there you want a few mental models. So for example, when releasing new products, I love the timing is more important than the market, the size of the market, which is more important than the team, which is more important than the product mental model. For personal productivity, I love the productivity pyramid, for example. For thinking in bets, I love the 70-20-10 rule. So like developing these mental models really helps you deal with the complexity. The most famous one in growth for a growth team is the ICE or the pie chart, for example, of thinking in bets. Like what's the probability of this succeeding? What's the impact it's going to have? And how easy is it to actually implement this? So a very important meta skill for dealing with complexity is definitely this sort of building up these mental models. And one of them, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yep. No, go ahead.
It's just one of my favorite ones. Maybe if I can is it okay if I dive deeper into one of them?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's kind of personal productivity mental model, but it's also team. And it's linked to long-termism. I think one thing that we have as growth leaders is we think too much in short term. And I've also learned to swing that personal pendulum the other way. You know, I come from a world of e-commerce, SaaS, short sales cycles, performance marketing, conversion rate optimization, et cetera, et cetera. And I've learned to swing the pendulum the other way a little bit because I've seen that to be more long-term has huge impacts in the sort of project we work on and the experiments we do, or even running a company or running a team. I mean, there's a reason why Jeff Bezos is spending millions on building a 10,000-year clock. And why he says that he gives his experiments 7 years to succeed or to fail. All of the greats seem to have this sort of long-term approach. Then you have problems with cash flow. I agree, but so the idea is that it's really like unknown sort of mental model, and it just makes sense. It's just an obvious one, and I can't remember who it's from. It's from one of these like life gurus, et cetera, which like I'm kind of allergic to, but this one works really well. It's called like the productivity pyramid. I prefer to call it the return on energy pyramid. And I've seen that it applies not only to myself, but also to teams and also to companies as a whole. It's really simple. Basically, it breaks down a day or week, a month or year or 10 years, whatever you want, into 4 types of activities. And it looks at the return on energy of these activities. We have our scarcest resource is time. We have limited time, limited energy. So how are you using that time and that energy? I mean, look, for example, we were talking about it before. We were doing business planning until like 2 a.m. yesterday. I'm exhausted. Like my energy level is not great today. I have like maybe 5-6 hours of pure focus today. How am I going to use it? And the top of the pyramid is what's called negative return on energy. It's activities that have negative ROIs that are detrimental. If I start eating sugar, if I go on social, if I jump into Slack right now, if I start answering my emails, for example, maybe not the emails part, but like, or if I, start going on LinkedIn and scrolling down and stuff like negative ROI. And it's okay to have some negative ROI time. Maybe it's downtime, whatever. Then the second part are the things that have positive return on energy, positive ROE, but the ROE is low, like low euro to hour value or low dollar to hour value. So typically I would put in that category like social media post, if you actually post it, or a sales call. It has ROE, but it has sort of low return on energy. Or yeah, maybe like having a meeting, or let's say not the first 10 minutes of your meeting, but like the 50, you get it, low return on energy, very short term. Then you have the third part that's high ROI activities. And there's a fourth part coming. Huh? The high ROI activities, they have high euro per hour value. So typically like after that sales call, you decide to change the process. So you build a new process, or building a strategy, or writing a big piece of building a big piece of content. So it's like foundational stuff that has building systems internal communications of a process that you found. Typically, as humans, we're not great, but we're quite good at allocating time across these three areas. And typically, as organizations as well, we're quite good. And because we can see impact that comes within the next quarter or within the next week. We as humans, we're able to. That's how we're wired. Where we're really bad is on the last part, what's called high lifetime value activities for an organization or for a person. We don't allocate enough energy to this bottom section, the high lifetime value activities. And these are actually activities that have the highest ROI, compound returns, actively fostering relationships, to give sort of a corny one. This includes, by the way, many couples. Why many couples don't make it? It's through lack of time investment, because the couple slowly degrades over time. Same thing with, climate change. We don't see the impact, so it slowly degrades, so we don't actually invest. Same thing with like breakthrough ideas. When's the last time you actually sat down and thought with no distractions? Like zero distractions and just thought. What's his name? Sherlock Holmes had something called 3-pipe problem. When a problem was so complex, he'd sit down and smoke 3 pipes to actually get through it. And that's how you get those eureka moments, those 0.01% of ideas that are going to yield 50% of the returns. Same thing with moments of deep work. And I often ask myself, like, how much have we actually dedicated as an organization to these high lifetime value activities? And what we've found as a company is the biggest one here is actually learning. Learning actually has one of the highest personal lifetime values or organizational lifetime values that you can imagine. And of course, right, we live in a knowledge economy. We're in a knowledge economy. So having knowledge is the greatest resource to have. Knowledge is achieved through learning. And with more knowledge, you make better decisions, more creative decisions. In a knowledge economy, learning and thinking are the single best long-term investments you can make for yourself or for your sort of your organization. And I really often ask, like, I know we all feel like we're learning on the job, but there's a lot of literature to prove that actually learning on the job doesn't lead to sort of breakthrough learning. It's you actually need something called deliberate learning. It was explained in the book, I think it was Drive or Peak. Can't remember which one of the two books. And ask yourself, like, when's the last time I actually did how much time have I spent on deliberate learning? This week or this month or this year, for example, on deliberate learning of a new capability to add to my capability set. And the European average is terrible. Like the European average is 24 minutes in a week for deliberate learning on average in Europe. Mm-hmm. If you look at the average number of hours worked across European countries, which is like around 44, that's less than 1% of time. Yet, that's one of the highest ROI activities you can do in a knowledge economy. Same thing, if you look at the amount that's spent on learning in organizations, for medium-sized companies and larger-sized organizations, so we're talking 500 all the way up to 100,000, it's like 728 euros on average per year spent on that learning, which is just ridiculously low. So one meta skill is this sort of long-termism, thinking in much longer terms. It doesn't have to be your entire focus, but make it at least. So I like the 70-20-10 rule from Google. 70% on medium risk, medium reward bets, optimization of current business processes, current business, just business as usual, but optimizing it. And then higher risk, higher reward. They like to split it as 20% for medium risk, high reward, and then 10% for high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
But yeah, so trying to be more long story short, thinking more long term, not thinking in quarters, but actually thinking in years, but not 100% of your energy, but like at least 10, 20%. I'm talking a day a week. Huh?
But I think you like, it kind of goes into one thing that a lot of people in growth need to think about. I think you mentioned it at the very beginning. It's this, most of us were kind of brought up on this performance marketing paradigm, right? Especially if you're in the B2C space, but even in the B2B space actually as well, depending on the sales cycles. But then you also now talked a lot about stuff that goes more into branding exercises, or like content, or like, anything that is not, it has not immediate value as well. And then, but then over time has like an exponential curve to it. Yeah. So if you would have to say, like, for growth leaders in particular, like, what can they do for themselves, but also with their team, in order to spend more time on the third and on the fourth level?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say that I was like 90% direct performance and then 10% brand marketing, for example. And by the way, branding is everything the company does. Huh? So branding is actually everything. But then we could talk about more specifically brand marketing, I would say. There's this beautiful use case. So we're all looking at the wrong attribution models, and we're all looking at the wrong using. Yes, we are. So by the way, it depends on. It really depends on your sales cycles. I do agree, and on how much funding you have. Like, if you don't have a lot of funding, let's say, and if you need to hit targets really on the short term, and we need that money to come in, then I understand the short termism. You need to get those conversions. But if you have a little bit of leeway, start thinking more long term, yes. But I am aware that it depends on your contexts. It really depends on what context you're in. If you need to hit those numbers, hit those numbers. But my goal would be that you attribute at least some of the time to that more long term thinking. I'm always reminded of that use case from Adidas. Beautiful use case. And what they did is Adidas basically went full direct, full performance marketing for like 4 years, really investing in direct performance marketing, digital marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And they were using the same attribution models that we do, or same attribution tools that we do. So it was like, Google last click attribution, Facebook attribution models, et cetera, et cetera. Then they finally started doing attribution correctly, which means that they brought in econometrists, or they started using an econometric attribution model that actually took into account all of the different touch points. And at that point, they were investing 23% in brand and 77% in performance. And they used the work by a guy called Les Binet and Peter Field, who did actual attribution modeling. So they were using 4 attribution models. It's coming back to it. They were using Google Last Click. They were using Google custom attribution models, Adobe, because they were using Omniture Catalyst, and Facebook attribution model. Turns out when they did an actual analysis using like Markov models, etc., it was 77% on performance, 23% on brand. It should have been 60% on brand and 40% on performance. And what happened is, I think in South America, their Google ads like stopped working for, I think it was like a week or something, or a day, and it had no impact on sales whatsoever. So that was kind of
sometimes it kind of requires these kind of insights, right?
Yeah, exactly. They were over investing in paid search. And so it was in Latin America where there was a breakdown in Google AdWords, and therefore they couldn't invest in paid search, and it didn't lead to a dip in anything or revenue.
That's crazy.
From SEO. Absolutely crazy. So either invest in the right attribution models, or you'll have to, in faith, use a bit of faith, understand that investing in long-term, authentic, consistent branding efforts, they call it opens hearts and opens wallets. we've seen from my company that since we've invested heavily, my co-founder, I have two co-founders, two of them, like Quentin and I, were really performance driven. And we have Peter, who's currently our CEO, and he's very brand marketing. He comes from the world of Red Bull, very brand oriented. But we've seen that those investments in brand are paying off so much, because you create that trust, that authenticity. And nowadays, in a world like where everyone is fighting for attention, the attention economy, when you can build those real relationships based on quality, it just makes everything so much simpler on the long term. Your question was, how can you convince teams to start working in this way? I would say start showing these use cases. Like I can share this, or this use case, for example. Start showing these use cases, and then force it on part of the time allocation, and use these mental models of, for 20% of the activities that we do, we don't expect to have a clear lagging indicator until a year. Some activities are marathons. PR, brand communications, those are marathons. Right. They're not sprints. Brand marketing is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So use that 80-20 split. 80% or 70% should be on a little bit more short-term quarterly results, and then 30% on the longer term. By the way, you can look for early signals. There is a way to do user research and get early signals. When we did a big brand revamp at a very, very large, at a really large pharma company, we started to look at early indicators of that brand revamp before launching it. We also did early pre-testing of video campaigns. What are the emotions that you get from this? You know how no one's talking about neuro tracking anymore? That's kind of funny. There's so many of these like hypes that just come our way, and then like Gartner hype.
Sure.
Yeah, and then it just stops after like 6 months. You never hear about it ever again. And then, are people still working on this? And like, these hypes are funny.
But I think you're touching like on something that is like, by doing research for this podcast, I heard you like quoting, I don't remember who it was. I think it was something like, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell, or something like that. Yeah. And I think, I don't remember where it was, but I think what a lot of growth leaders are forced to do, or at least perceived forced to do, is they have very high growth targets in the short term, and it's very difficult to kind of argue against that, because it's all about revenue, short-term revenue. What are some good arguments that you have seen to kind of counter that a little bit, from like, me as a growth leader needs to talk to the board or needs to talk to other people in the executive team? Have you seen any arguments that actually stick next to what you just mentioned, like user quotes or stuff like that?
So I think for large organizations, it's a lot easier because we start to talk about who the stakeholders of a company are. It's not just the shareholders anymore. It's also society as a whole. It's also the employees, and it's also the environment, for example. Those are important stakeholders. It's no longer just shareholders. I think maybe once again, it depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about a blitz scaling scale up, that's funded by a VC firm, good luck with that one. They need to hit those we're blitz scaling. You need to hit those user acquisition numbers.
It's a game you're playing, right? As well.
Yeah, that's the game. Yeah. So for that one, I think it's a lot more difficult. And I'm not gonna go convince the key shareholders or founders of that company that they should be growing their company in a different manner. But that's not the case for most organizations. It's a tough question because you're asking me how to change the mindset of the organization as a whole. And typically it goes through a lot of mindset changes. It's a tough one. We actually don't have that problem that much. I mean, typically, if you're working in an organization that's really focused on user retention metrics for the sake of user retention metrics, then that's the game we play in that context. But I actually don't feel like it's such a big issue. or it's not so widespread, I would say. I'm just trying to think, and that's why I'm not. I'm trying to think like how many times has this actually happened? I've seen this a lot from really short, like marketplaces, for example, with short sales cycles. So we work with a lot of marketplaces as well, or SaaS businesses, ones that are funded by that are famous for being high growth, blitz scaling, et cetera, et cetera. But then you're in the wrong context. I mean, that's like, I love the analogy of the H2O molecule. I think it's from Loonshot's Safi Bakal. So H2O molecule is the exact same molecule in two different contexts, whether that's in ice or whether that's in water. But that molecule is not going to change the complete context of where they're in. So maybe you thrive better in ice, maybe you thrive better in water. At some point, you can't change the context. The only way to change it is to make sure you as a chief growth officer make it to the C-suite and start having that impact. I mean, it's proven that purpose-driven companies yield better shareholder returns on the long term. There's huge HBR. There was a huge HBR special edition about this. I think it was about a year ago. And actually, our chief product officer put it on the table as, guys, we need to be more purpose-driven. And we're getting boggled down by commercial incentives, but we started this company to be impact-driven. So let's start, walking the walk as well. So it goes through that mindset change. Maybe we can share that purpose-driven report. What's crazy is it actually has positive bottom line impact.
Right.
You retain people longer, better experiments, better life at work. You run better. Yeah. So also better experiments. I don't have a short answer for this one. How to actually convince leaders? It's mindset change. So it's story and having that influence.
But I think I've actually seen that, I don't know how new it is actually, but I've seen that you have now a course up on the website. It's kind of Growth for Good, and I thought it's brilliant because I mean it's both something good for society. It's good for your employees. It creates a lot of meaning, but also as a branding exercise, just to the outside. You're not just a company that is focused on growth for in a capitalistic sense only. So these kind of exercises make sense on many different levels, and will have if executed properly, will have an impact on the bottom line.
But I disagree. I do think they need to be capitalist. I really do think so. We're not going anti-growth.
But that's why you didn't make them free as well, which I think is the right approach.
So the work from Carlota Perez shows that we've been through 4 or 5 industrial revolutions already. So industrial revolutions started in 1771, and every time they follow 3 similar phases. You have this first phase, which is basically a bubble every single time. You had it with steam, you had it with railways, you had something called canal mania back in the UK, where there was overinvestment in canals, etc. So we've had 4 industrial revolutions. We're in the 5th one. They all go through 3 phases. One is overinvestment. Finance is completely deregulated, overinvestment bubble, etc., etc. Greed. Then you have a recession, the bubble pops, and then you have the golden age. It's happened 4 times. Now we're in the 5th one. We're in the ICT revolution, started in 1971 with the creation of the semiconductor. And what you see is we've had this huge also bubble that's been growing. And then we had recession. We're still in the recession. The recession hasn't stopped. So you had the recession 2000, 2008. Now we're going through the pandemic. And what needs to happen for us to go into a golden era, we need societal and environmental incentives to be aligned with capitalistic financial incentives. Those need to get aligned. So when we did Growth for Good, we are helping companies, we're helping build up these digital capabilities for companies that, yes, are doing good, but also have an actual business model. An actual business model that makes money and that can be sustainable, not just for charities. So that's sort of the premise. But imagine this. Imagine a world where growth loops, behavioral psychology, Cialdini's persuasions of principle, conversion-centric design, performance marketing, rapid experimentation was used not just by big political campaigns or by, big insurance companies, which, by the way, are not evil, but was also used by NGOs or social enterprises. And typically those companies don't have those tools. I mean, like, imagine if you had the same power as a rocket internet, same techniques, behavioral techniques, or the same techniques used by Facebook's algorithm, like Social Dilemma documentary, which I think is a bit, all right, anyway, the same.
Just saw it as well, yeah.
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 But imagine if there was the same techniques used for persuasion, like tapping into the human brain. Like imagine if everybody at NGOs finally read Hooked by Nir Eyal and understood like rewards of the tribe, of the hunt, and of the self, and applied that to NGOs, applied that to fight climate change. Oh, that would be freaking fantastic. So what we did is we decided to launch Growth for Good, and we've been helping things like Ocean Cleanup. Ocean Cleanup actually has a business model behind it. But they're maybe not as sophisticated in how they run growth and experiments and performance and brand marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea was let's actually subsidize it and let's give them those capabilities so that we do make the world. Yeah, it's super corny, I know, but like push the world in the right direction. Imagine if somebody gave us like $2 million right now and I could run a bunch of performance ads based on psychographic personas, tapping into the personality of people around climate change and the need to act. You could move mountains with that type of strategy. And typically, everyone listening to this doesn't work for an organization that's evil. Like organizations work to make the world a little bit better place. So that's why where brand comes into it, it's making that message actually resonate. And it's not just about shareholder earnings. It's actually about helping the world. Look, insurance, like everybody thinks insurance is evil. I'm happy to have an insurance. I had a problem with the car last week. I'm super happy about it. Same thing, pharmaceutical companies, like oncology, they have a whole oncology thrombosis departments. Most people are not working for companies that are purely evil, but you need to get that purpose out a little bit better, and you can resonate it inside your experiments as well, or inside your team. Going a little bit all over the place, but
no, thanks for clarifying that. I think, like, if we take a couple of steps back and look at kind of your story and the learnings you've made to kind of arrive where you are today, if you would have to summarize that in like 1 to 3 lessons that you've learned over your career that kind of shaped your thinking today, what would those be?
Well, one is I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just learning the whole time. I am and forever will be a work in progress. Like you talked about getting me here. I don't feel like I'm anywhere yet. Like life is meant to be a journey, and the purpose of life for me is exploration. So I don't feel like I'm anywhere. I'm still exploring. What I have learned, I mean, who am I to say what I've, what's important, what's not important, but just that thing of like, just staying curious. Really, that's it. Continuously being curious and being like a lifelong learner, and never having that ego of thinking you know things better. Just really that curiosity. I mean, I've had so many roles, like lots of experimentation. When I was 20, I went to China and I decided, like, I did an internship in a company. And after that internship of 6 months, just really randomly, like, let's start an import-export company. I went to a small town called Yiwu, Zhejiang Yiwu, and I decided, yeah, I can actually do quality control for large companies here, and let's start a import-export company. And, I was earning like 500 euros a month in a shitty ass apartment, just like grinding, hustling with my little dictionary to try to translate what polyurethane was in Chinese, because it's the type of plastic that's used for this product. And then just organically went into sort of a fashion brand, because I decided that these skinny male ties, I could put my logo on it. So I went onto some courses on how to design a logo and how to actually, what the measurements for a tie are. And then that started working well. And let's sell these on eBay. And this seems to be working really well on eBay. Maybe we need our own website. So let's learn to code our own website. Back in the days, you didn't have Shopify. So let's code it, learn a bit of HTML, and what's this AdWords thing? And what's this content marketing thing? And it just growing sort of organically. So really just being curious and continuously investing in learning, basically. Like when you have a problem, don't delegate it. try to figure it out yourself, because then you'll have a much better understanding of how to solve these problems and you'll add a tool set. I like to talk about cognitive bandwidth. So imagine that world is a series of problems you need to solve and decisions you need to take. Every time you learn something new, you open what Bernardo, our head of data science, our head of science actually, calls a growth option. So you open a new part of your brain, which means that you can start having more creative solutions, making more connections. Every time you learn something new, whether it's machine learning, data, the basics of organizational design, performance management, rapid experimentation, whatever it is, even like learning how to use a bow and arrow, I don't know, anything, biology. I read up a lot on biology recently, and I see the analogies with businesses. Every time you do that, you create new possible connections in your brain. And that's the basis of creativity. The definition of creativity, in my opinion, is linking two nodes or two areas that have never been connected before. Imagine if you put an accountant with a visual artist. That would create something really creative, something completely new. And the more you learn, the more you expand your cognitive bandwidth. The more possible combinations come from your brain and the more tools you have to answer questions and take decisions, the stronger you become. The problem is you don't feel the ROI right now. Like there is very little next week, next month, next quarter ROI of going on and learning the basics of biology. But they're there, but they're much more long-term. And we have a cognitive bias called temporal discounting, urgency bias, where we tend to discount longer term rewards for shorter term rewards. Best example is getting shit-faced in a bar. I don't know who likes to call it. Getting really drunk is borrowing happiness from the next day. Uh-huh. Now, I'm not old, but I'm like getting older. I'm 36 now. And, you feel it like if you go out and go hard, that your next day is actually, if you don't mix alcohols, it's okay. It doesn't. And there's a few techniques not to have it. But we do like to do this temporal discounting a lot. So I'm going to go on Slack and answer a bunch of messages, answer some emails, la-di-da-di-da, rather than investing in learning, for example, this morning, or rather than investing in a very important relationship. So I think to answer your question, the first one is always be curious. Always be freaking curious and keep like trying to figure stuff out yourself to at least develop an understanding about it. And the second one is to be more, it's the same one as before, to think more longer term. Like, is what I'm investing my time in today or this week, will it have really long-term impact? And I know it's hard when you have deadlines. I know it's really hard. I mean, I have a bazillion deadlines, but I block that time in. I really just block it in and I force myself to spend that time on, at least I try to do like 7 hours of deliberate learning a week. And I know that listening to podcasts might sound like deliberate learning and it's good and you can be curious, but I try to dedicate like 6 to 7 hours of actually learning something new and actually doing it, not just receiving, but actually executing it.
Yeah. What does deliberate learning mean to you? Like if you say deliberate learning, then how would that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me look at the definition of deliberate learning according to the Peak book, a deliberate practice. Yeah, so it requires a teacher who can provide practice activities designed to help a student improve his or her performance. That's it. So you need to have sort of a teacher or a guide who can create sort of activities for you and judge you. It's the book Peak Performance. By Anders Ericsson. And you need to get pushed out of your comfort zone. So you might think that it's okay to learn a language on Duolingo, but the best way to learn a language is to actually have a coach or a teacher who gives you sort of feedback and helps you on that route. And this has really been studied. You need that accountability partner. You need that feedback loop. Yeah. So actual try to have these 6-7 hours where I actually have that accountability partner and I'm actually getting that that coaching and those feedback loops essentially from somebody who actually knows. And you can learn either way, but that way is just so much faster. And 6-7 hours, I know it's a lot, but it's not that much. I mean, you're awake like 14 times 7. So what is that? Like 90 something hours per week. Like 6-7 hours, it's less than 10% of your time spent. Even 2, like, who does 2 hours of deliberate learning a week nowadays? Not that many people.
Right, right. Have you seen like when you hire people, like what are some of the qualities that you look for? I mean, you mentioned like curiosity and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That is important to you. Is that something that when you hire new people that you actively look for? Are there other things that are very important to you now? I mean, you're at your fourth company that you started. Like, what are some learnings there? Like, how do you attract the right talent, or how do you decide for the right talent?
Yeah, we've made it systematic now. So
Mm-hmm.
our culture at GrowthTribe is very much, we have our values that are very specific and that we also bring up in performance reviews. No, wait, we don't call them performance reviews anymore. I can't remember what we call them now. We're humane now. Because also in performance reviews, the colleague is also judging the company, so it goes both ways. But basically our team is hungry, fast. Wait, we're hungry, we're hungry, we're fast, and we're humble and kind. And those are the three things that we look for. So we look for hunger, always be learning, always be teaching, and still hunger to sort of execute a little bit and to get hands dirty. And that one, it's kind of easy to test. I mean, like you can ask a lot about what books they like to read and how they upskill themselves. And we run a lot of challenges also. Like a lot of our hiring process has to do with not just being really good at interviews, but doing a little challenge. And also, like, it's funny, but kindness and humility are really linked to being data driven.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, they are. So especially in marketing roles, like if you think of marketing roles is great for egomaniacs. Why? Marketing is one of those things where your opinion matters. So in like, it's one of those, if you like studied accounting, for example, or finance or law, your opinion doesn't really matter. You need to learn the law, or you need to learn accounting, or you need to learn legal. Same thing with computer science. A lot of your opinion doesn't really matter. Your creativity will once you get it. But marketing, it's like, oh, here's this course where I can give my opinion on how I think we could impact people and what the messaging should be. So It seems to attract a lot of people who think their opinion matters. Which is why it's sometimes hard to work with marketeers or even with product owners. As a product owner, you're supposed to be visionary, right? Same thing with like UX designers. You're supposed to understand user experience better than anybody else. But if you can align kindness with hunger, if you can have that kindness, that humility, guess what a humble person does? They'll be like, oh, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I should talk to some customers. Maybe I should do some user research. Maybe I should look at the data. Versus somebody who's a little bit maybe less kind and maybe a bit more ego driven. Yeah, they will tend to be more visionary and more gut driven and more I'm amazing driven. So we try to really hire for that hunger and ability to execute and to be curious and to learn with that kindness and that sort of humility. Those two things put together work really, really well. Now, the problem is if you hire too many people that are really kind, then they all want to over deliver. That's our issue at the moment. Everybody wants to over deliver on everything. And then sometimes we need to be like, whoa, you don't need to over deliver this much on absolutely everything. We need to start capping amount of time spent, like per client or per project. So it sort of bites you in the ass in the other way. But that's really how we hire. And then hiring also with a lot of, it's just recruiting 101, a lot of steps to actually get through the door. We have 3 or 4 culture intakes before somebody's hired. We have a challenge. We have 3 or 4 hiring interviews, et cetera, et cetera. We have a TT38 test. We spend a lot of time on that. And also to make sure it's the right position for the person. There's nothing worse. There's 3 reasons why people leave companies. It's, sorry to use the term employee. I don't like that term because it's to employ someone, like to use them, whereas it's going both ways. They're using us too. But so you have employee culture fit, employee position fit, and employee supervisor fit. Those 3 things. And there's nothing worse than allowing the wrong person to come into the company, but also for them because they don't fit the culture or their supervisor for the actual position. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does, because I think the very last point is also important, because like, how do you retain the people? Because what I've seen in my experience is a lot of people leave because of like bad management or like bad leadership, just because they can maybe not use their strengths that they would actually have. So they might be a really good, they might be actually really good at their job, but the manager or the leadership doesn't allow it. Can you like, what do you have some set principles that you go by in terms of leadership, or what do you think good leadership entails?
I don't think I'm a good leader, to be honest. I think it could be so much better. It just comes down to humility. I don't think we have the best retention rates on the planet. I don't even think retention is that important. I mean, we've gone through 4 changes in like 3 years. Of course, people are going to go. Mm-hmm. It's normal. I think actually retention is, sometimes we try to optimize retention when you should be looking at a counter metric as well. Same thing with growth, right? You might be increasing your conversion rate on this part of the website, but you're hurting the customer experience overall. I think we made a lot of mistakes in the past on actual retention. We weren't good enough at building growth paths for people. Mm-hmm. Our managers were too junior. They didn't get enough management training. Somebody was hired for a certain position, but because of changes from the outside or inside world, they ended up doing something else. What I think is important is more to be human. Like every single person who's left GrowthTribe, when they come back, we still have like not hugs anymore because we're not allowed to, but we still have a really good rapport, let's say. So also like there's been some studies on retention, that retention actually sometimes hurts the company rather than helps it. It's great to get new, fresh blood in. Now, I'm going to get destroyed by my HR department for saying this because they're working a lot on engagement and on retention. Sure. And I think a lot of the reasons why people left was, because of us. You should look at yourselves. Now if you really want to increase retention within an organization, invest in learning. It's one of the biggest reasons why people leave is they don't feel like they're actually still learning, especially for like millennial age group. Second one is not enough recognition, actually showing recognition to people within the company. Third one is improving how much of a purpose-driven company you are. Like people don't wake up to increase the bottom line of a profit and loss account. They just don't. People wake up for working on a purpose. And so that goes through internal communication and living the purpose, being the purpose. Like remember that Patagonia campaign in 2011, do not buy this jacket?
Yeah.
The whole, like that's really authentic, purpose-driven organization. A little bit less recently, but still quite a bit. Mm-hmm. People don't wake up to make money for shareholders. Like nobody does. They want to see.
Right.
That's easy for me. I have a learning organization right now. It's a lot harder if you're selling cosmetic subscriptions, or if you're, like an insurance company, you're selling like but there is typically so we're really working on that purpose. I would say the top 3 tips is work a lot on the recruitment part to make sure it's super clear that there's a fit with the company. Yes, 100%. Build real growth paths for people. People want to grow. We have much shorter career attention spans. Make sure that the growth paths are super clear, and then make sure you're investing in people. I mean, I know it sounds corny and we always talk about this, but you're investing in their growth and in their next steps. Companies, people are hiring you as an organization for their, sure, for salary, but also for their well-being and for their next growth path. So try to invest in it as much as possible. And it's normal that people leave companies. I mean, it's totally freaking normal.
Yeah, thanks for being so honest. I think that's it's really good to also look at it from the employee's perspective, right? I mean, they're kind of hiring you in a way as well, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
And also like growth people or people in UX, in data, in performance. I tell them all. I have this discussion all the time. You're super employable. You are super employable. I think they have the leverage on us, to be totally honest. Like, I don't know, everybody who left GrowthTribe, for example, find a fantastic job afterwards. Like everybody. And if people are really, really employable nowadays. Now, a little bit less with COVID, like it's the pendulum swung the other way, but we're going to go back. And if you're working in tech, et cetera, you're the ones who seem to be less employable are people who haven't adopted that growth mindset, haven't developed that digital intuition, that data-driven intuition. And they're scared. And I understand it.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here to help also. I mean, like, I call us like digital psychologists in a way. We remove the technical and make sense of that digital world. But have empathy. I mean, like, put yourself, you're being employed as a company to provide salary, job satisfaction, happiness to the people you work with.
Thank you. I think that's a good place to go into our last question, which has a little bit to do with career development in a sense, and what you just talked about. If you are a marketer today and you're kind of, have like 3 years in marketing already, and you're kind of looking to become a marketing leader, like, do you have some books and resources or courses, people to follow that you like to mention, maybe even to your employees or to friends who ask you, like, what are some of the most common things that you recommend to people to actually grow their career in marketing?
Yeah, it's really hard because, I was using the doctor analogy before.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking me for like a medicine, let's say, but everybody has a different diagnostic.
Yeah.
So everyone has different goals, different personality, and different skills that they're talents that they're good at. So it really depends. That's also why we've built for all of our courses, our bootcamp courses, which are sort of free off-the-shelf courses you can take and do online with deliberate learning, or our corporate courses. We always do a capability scan, which looks at what your life goals are, where your current strengths are, to identify where the gaps are. So it's really hard for me to give like a carpet
that makes sense
sort of answer. I think, to summarize it, in marketing specifically, there's like 3 paths. There's one path that's on the analytics performance, if that's what you like, if you kind of like spreadsheets and numbers and you like playing with amplitude, Omniture Catalyst, if you see yourself organically going towards data, I would definitely dive deeper in that. So data analytics, web analytics, data-driven decision-making, data communication, data visualization. One of the core skills for the future, for now and the future, is visualizing data. If you know how to build a Sankey soap with Power BI tools, for example, data visualization makes you so powerful. Everybody's always talking about soft skills like communication. I think hard skills enable the soft skills. If you want to be a good communicator, learn data visualization and data storytelling, because you don't see the data the way other people do. We do a lot of data visualization and data storytelling courses for large organizations across all industries, because we see there's a big gap between data teams and the rest of the organization because they don't speak the same language. So we create that bridge. Also focusing on automation. Keep focusing on that and build that skill up. If you're more on the analytics performance side, keep diving into that attribution modeling, data visualization. But know yourself. Maybe you're more of the creative type, more of the user experience type, service design, user research, visual design, user experience design. I would really hone on where you're good. And the life pro tip, or the tip there would be, I can't remember, also one of those gurus that was giving this advice, fantastic advice. You don't need to be in the top 1% of anything. It's not even possible. I mean, for some people it is, but for 99% people out of 100, it's not. You just need to be in like the top 25 of 2-3 things and combine those together. So imagine if you're in the top 25% of data scientists, or you know how to use data, and top 25% of designers. Ooh, that's a powerful combination to have. Look, I'm an okay marketeer. I'm pretty good at mind reading, all that stuff. But I'm like maybe in, who cares about top, but I was a good marketeer, and I happen to be also good at sort of design, visual design, and I'm quite good at speaking and storytelling. So I combine those together, and that's really helped me recently.
Right.
Content creation.
That's kind of where it comes together. Yeah,
exactly. That's where it comes together. So I would say, especially, there's like 3 things you can do. One is you can specialize on the analytics part. If you're a freelancer, it's better to specialize, to be totally honest. It's actually better to specialize. But if you're working inside an organization, it's better to go wide and to go T-shape. So you can either specialize on the more analytical side, data visualization, data communication, data automation, web analytics, data analytics, that stuff. Or you can specialize more on the sort of user experience, product management, visual design, user research, campaign creation, copywriting side.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going into more of a leadership position, I would do the third route, which is T-shaping. And the best leaders are a little bit more generalists because they understand all of these tools that are available. I mean, if you look at any Nobel Prize winner, they just came out recently, right? They all have side interests. They don't just interest in their own specialty. They're super curious people. And, being great, I think, is about identifying patterns across different fields, and you need that curiosity. By the way, also want to say, like, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. This type of conversation can create a lot of anxiety. If you're listening to a podcast already, it probably means that you're already curious and you're already a learner and you've already got the growth mindset and you're already investing in yourself. You're going to be okay. I mean, you really are. You're already making that effort. What I would say is please spend time on some deliberate learning, on actual learning, not just learning by osmosis or learning on the actual job. For that, you can listen to the Peak Blinkist, or you can read the book or watch the 1 hour video. So that was a little bit like, I don't know if it's career tips, but sort of directions where you can go. And if you're in a leadership role, like I said before, invest in learning more about finance. That's one thing I see with growth leaders they don't understand. Just understanding a profit and loss, like a P&L, a balance sheet, and just a cash flow statement. And, making buddies with the finance team, because there you'll find out what's actually happening within the company and whether you can be long-termist, short-termist, and where the impact actually is. And broaden your horizons. I have this little challenge. It's called the 30-day random lecture challenge. So for 30 days, instead of watching something on Netflix, force yourself to watch a random documentary online. And so for 30 days, I watched every night 1 hour random documentary, one about ants, one about biology, anthropology, the impact of grandmothers over the past 600 years, the history of math, just really one about ghosts, really random stuff. And your brain really starts to feed off of that wide curiosity. We can share a link in the notes later. I think we build it into a piece of content on the blog.
Cool. No, thanks a lot for this answer. I think this is very. Do you have like, because a lot of times, you just get books out of people and they're like, yeah, this, I read this and this and this. But I actually think your answer makes a lot of sense. Also kind of showing people the perspective that you have like different paths, general paths you can go down to, and then you kind of find your rabbit holes yourself. But at the very beginning, you said like this kind of self-diagnosing strength and stuff like that. Do you have something like a tool that you are using that is publicly available, or like where?
So if you go to, let me see what the short link is. If you go to www, do people still say that? www?
You can.
So it's grow, GROW. It's a short link, so it's weird. Grow, GROW .ac, GROW.ac / GT, /scan, SCAN. So GROW.ac /SCAN, scan. We've got a free version of the capability tool that we're testing. This is only for data leaders and marketing leaders, for growth leaders. It's only for those two. It's not perfect. We're working on it. And it's more to diagnose your team, not so much for yourself. It's more to diagnose your team. But from doing it, you'll also start to be able to ask yourselves questions from your personal self. And even though it's still very MVP and it takes 25 minutes to do it, we've got really, really good results so far. People coming back saying, okay, I've identified where the lacks in my team are, but also myself, what I need to focus on. The hardest thing of involving in today's context when we push learning is knowing what to learn next and how deep to go. and you get this huge freaking backlog. And that's what this capability scan is trying to address.
Yeah, I think that's the last thing you said. That's so true. Like there's so much. I think I don't remember who it said, but like there's this like just in time information and just in case information, and it's so difficult sometimes to kind of discern what you should consume to actually get you to the next step. Well, thank you very, very much for these great insights. Where can people reach you? I mean, our audience is mostly marketing leaders and marketers in general. Like, where should they go? Where can you direct them to?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you have any questions or want to have a chat, whatever, try LinkedIn. I'm one of these people who doesn't really reply to emails. I'm really bad at replying. I've been, it's about saying no to a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But on LinkedIn, I'm really open because that channel is not completely saturated yet. So look me up on LinkedIn, add me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of stuff there too. I really like the algorithm there. Until recently, they're going after the wrong metrics. I think they're focusing really on the wrong metrics at LinkedIn at the moment. They're trying to boost engagement and they're forgetting about quality a little bit. But yeah, LinkedIn. That's basically, yeah, exactly. It's like even they started with the double tap from Instagram like 2 months ago or something. It's like, really? Is that really important? Is that really what you should be working on? And so yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. And also check us out at GrowthTribe.io if you want to, upskill your team, build the capabilities. See it as an experiment. I mean, like, if you're a larger organization, come see us. See it as a business. We can build a business case out of it. Hey, instead of using that consulting budget, or instead of using, I don't know, some ad spend next quarter, let's actually do a capability test. And you'll see that after like 3 months, you're going to be amazed at the type of return on investment that small budget got you. So check us out at growthtribe.io.
Listen, David, thank you so much. It was a super interesting discussion and great insights. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye, David. Cheers. Bye-bye.